Welcome back to the Audice Opere podcast. This is Ryan Grant, and we are happily joined today by Father Chad Ripperger, a recurring guest in our program. Father, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I was cruising around Twitter the other day, and I happened to see a meme of some sort where it has your picture up, and it says, Tick-Tock is mortally sinful. And I've listened to most of your conferences, and I was like, pretty sure Father didn't say that. So the title of this episode is, What Did Father Ripperger Really Say? So is Tick-Tock mortally sinful?
Yeah, well, first of all, I never said that. So the answer to the question is, Tick-Tock's like any other kind of media. It can be morally neutral, so you can use it for good or bad. And so, not that I would recommend people spend a lot of time on it, but I do think that it's one of those things that sometimes people put memes out about me. Actually, I get a certain amount of entertainment when people put out memes that are entertaining in nature and actually funny, but everybody knows it's not something that I would say, right? So that I don't mind. I actually get a certain kind of entertainment out of that. But when things are something in which people could easily misconstrue that, did he really say that? Those are the things that kind of concern me. I just don't want the people to be confused. So, and I tried to track it down a little bit, and I could never find out who actually put it out. And I am presuming they're being benign about it, probably trying to be funny in relationship to it. But, if you're going to put out memes, I have no problem. Just make sure it's clear that it's not something that I would actually say.
Now, there was also another, a less benign mischaracterization recently. There was an article that appeared in the UK tablet The Sun, which I believe was quoting one of your online sermons or something else that you wrote, and they were claiming that you said all Democrats are possessed.
Yeah, that was an interview that I'd actually did with Father Heilman, and in there I was talking about various aspects of the current political situation, the necessity to be praying for a proper outcome in relationship to the election. If you listen to that entire podcast or that interview, the word Democrat does not appear once in the entire thing. So if you actually look at that article in The Sun, it was very disingenuous because it would say things like, Father Ripper says that Democrats are, and then quote, and then it would have my quote. And I was actually talking about the deep state problem, not Democrats per se, because in my estimation, it's hard to know these matters for certain, but the deep state cuts across both political parties. It's both Democrats and Republicans. It's a thing that's in all of the different facets of government. And so it didn't have anything to do with the Democrats, but this guy was trying to paint me out as if I was saying that Democrats were possessed. And then he also criticized my videos that I did on communism and Satanism and how their psychology is practically identical, and they proceed in the same way. And he was criticizing that, but this primarily had to do with it seemed to me as I was reading it, I must confess, it was hard for me to see that it was benign, that it was just a misinterpretation, because it was almost seemed calculated that he was trying to make me either look like a kook or a quack or something, rather than somebody who was trying to give a legitimate analysis to the behavior of the deep state.
So now, there was another one I saw, which was something to the effect of, I can't find any seminarians not using anime.
Yeah, I think it was about diocesan seminaries that can't find it. And actually, to be quite frank with you, I hardly know what anime even is. I've seen it, etc., but it's, that's not something that I would actually say. And I think, again, it's probably put out by the same people who did the Tick-Tock one. And I think there's a certain humor in that. And, I think people are trying to, it's a caricature of something that I would say. But in point, in fact, I wouldn't say that, because I don't know that much about anime. And I don't know that much about the seminarians coming into the diocesan seminaries. So, yeah, that's not one of that I said either.
Now, a lot of times on various places, there's a Facebook, or as I prefer to call it, Fedbook group. For you, it's called Father Chad Ripperger takes up 20% of my hard drive or something of that sort. On there, you routinely see people get up and say, well, Father Ripperger said essential oils were evil, and we can't ever use essential oils, and because that's witchcraft. And I know I was pretty sure you'd never said that. So what about can a creative thing be evil in itself?
No, in fact, all created things are good because they're created by God. But I think that a lot of times when I'm starting to experience more and more is whenever I do, with interviews, I'm a little less this way, but generally speaking, whenever I do anything formal or I state anything formal, especially in writing, very technical about precisely how I'm wording things so that people can have clarity, but also so that it cannot be misconstrued. Unfortunately, today people don't have a lot of mental virtue, basically, because mental virtues are what gives our judgment precision. And so they'll hear me say things, and then parts get truncated off. So, like, for example, in this particular case with essential oils, I said, no, you can use essential oils if you find there's some benefit to them. But I basically just said, with essential oils, the only thing you have to be aware of is the fact that there are some people who are involved in Eastern religions and things of that sort who are doing rituals over these things or cursing them before they go out. So I told them that there's nothing wrong with using essential oils. The only thing you have to be careful is the source. You need to make sure you know the source of these things so that you don't end up with that particular problem.
Now, if you did, say, have something that somebody had cursed like that, is it something that a blessing from the ritual could fix?
There is actually, if I recall correctly, in the Rituale Romanum, there is an actual blessing for medicine, but that's something which would help. One of the other things is that in the book of minor exorcisms and deliverance prayers, which is meant for clergy, there's an actual blessing for medicine for two reasons. One is to that way when you're consuming it, if there's any type of diabolic influence in relationship to the illness that you might have, not that all your illnesses are caused by that, but there can be some that are, and so this would have a good effect in relationship to that. But part of it is also to address that very issue, is to make sure that it's properly exercised and cleaned up spiritually, so that if there is something that you're unaware of, you're less likely to be impacted by it. And so there is already a recognition on the church historically that these problems, it's not a modern phenomenon, is that this has been a historical issue in the church where certain people involved in the producing of these things, not all, but some that were involved in it were doing these rituals over them to boost their addictive effect or to hurt people or harm people, because we're starting to see that a little bit more. For example, we catch wind every so often about some of the drugs coming over the border from Mexico into the illegal drugs, that the cartels are actually having people curse them in order to harm Americans and things of this sort. So, and the church has been aware of this for centuries. And so that's one of the reasons why those particular rituals were added to various rituals, not just the Rituale Romanum, but other rituals. And some of the rituals I found from that book, but that comes from a 16th century ritual. So this is something that's been around for a while. The church has been aware of this problem for a while. But be very clear, that meant that the church didn't counsel people not to use these things. What they were just doing is blessing them just to make sure that that wasn't a particular issue.
In a recent podcast that was published actually on the same channel, Sensus Fidelium, on the topic of homeopathy, the speaker mentioned that you had said to make certain that the medicines were not produced with any occult ritual. Now, some people have taken that to mean all homeopathy is cursed and leads to the occult. So again, what did Father Ripperger really say?
Yeah, actually, I think that's not exactly what I said, because we did have an exchange of emails in relationship to that. I haven't listened to the interview to find out if what I said that she recounts is actually precisely what I said. But it was actually the same principle that homeopathy, which has been around for centuries, the church has talked about it. In fact, you know quite a bit more of the history than I do. But it's been around for centuries, and that in point in fact, it was under the same kind of principles. That is, people can curse it, and as a result, people can become possessed from it. But that doesn't mean that homeopathy in itself is bad. And I think that this is one of the things that each, like the homeopathic remedies, can be analyzed on their own, independently, just to see if they have a legitimate scientific effect, etc., which a lot of them have. A lot of them are being done. Of course, it's being suppressed by big pharma and the like. But this is something in which many people have had received a lot of benefit from them. So, and it's been, like I said, been around for quite a while. So, in and of itself, it's not. I think there's also a misunderstanding that somehow or another that homeopathy, you can correct me on the history, but that it was resurrected by some guy or started by some guy who was a witch doctor or something, Freemason. And so because of that, this is the problem that we actually have with it. Well, it's like anything else. This is something that's been around for centuries. He might get his name assigned to it, but that doesn't mean that he was the one who came up with it, because it's, like I said, it's been around for centuries. And the point being is that you can still make use of these things as long as, that you know your source. I tell people, make sure that you know the source of the companies or the people that are producing the stuff, so that you know that it's a clean line of source in relationship to your receiving it. There's not a list of things that cause people possession. We just know the general categories. And that in the sense that we know that anything that's morally sinful can cause people to become possessed. If you drink or eat something that's cursed, you can become possessed. And that's why I tell people, make sure that, if you don't know the exact source, I tell people then it's better off to avoid it until you can find a source that you know is clean. And even then I would just have it blessed with that ritual. But there is a list. In fact, it's in a book that I put out. It's called Minor Exorcisms and Deliverance Prayers. Again, it's the one for clergy. There is a list of things that we know can cause diabolic influence. But that list is very easy to be misinterpreted. So every time I teach exorcists, I have to tell them, look, there's different kinds of things listed in here. There's some that we know de facto can cause possession, like some particular kind of mortal sin or something like that. But then there's other ones which are listed not because they're evil in themselves and themselves are going to cause possession, but because of some other reason that's attached to them. And so this is one of the reasons why, and it's kind of a heads up list. So we just tell people, watch for this. If you find out someone is using homeopathy, then what you need to do is investigate to make sure that their source was clean, and then also check to make sure that if the possession did happen because of the homeopathy, it's not the homeopathy itself that's the cause. It's the actual rituals or the curses that are put on it that cause the problem. And so a lot of those things on that list are those things that commonly can be cursed or things of that sort. So it doesn't have anything to do with the actual homeopathy itself.
And if anyone's wondering about how do I know my source, well, Highlands, Hylands, that's actually a Catholic family that runs Highlands. And their stuff still works, contrary to what you might have heard in another interview.
I think one other thing I would say, too, about this is St. Hildegard made the observation that there is no disease which man has for which God did not provide a remedy in nature. And so we already know that if you find, I think that's just one of the stories of Big Pharma. Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller, for starting all this, is this idea that trying to poo-poo natural remedies and things of this sort as quackery, rather than taking a look at them, see what's actually valuable or beneficial, what has history shown us about these particular kinds of things, because he wasn't going to make any money off of it. When in point, in fact, it seems to me that if you actually look at the way God set things up, we just have to find the thing in nature that can actually help us, and then that's what we actually use in relationship to these things. So I personally think that there's a bit of anti-providentialism in this, in the sense that people don't, certain people who can't benefit from those things want to poo-poo because they're going to benefit some other way by some other product that they put out. They try and denigrate those things, when in point in fact, we know that because of God's providential plan, he always provides for us what we need. And so there's something in nature, we just have to spend the time trying to find it, and then making sure that we understand how it works, etc. And then nothing says we can't use it. In fact, we should use it, because that's why God actually provided it.
So how about on the flip side, there's pharmaceuticals that people trust in. They say, oh, well, we can trust this stuff. It's coming from a medical company, and we can find all the ingredients on it, so therefore it's safe. Well, can that stuff be cursed as well?
Yeah, actually, it can be. As I mentioned, the illegal drugs coming out of Mexico, some of them, not all of them, are having this problem. We've also come across a couple of cases with diabolic influence in which it started with a person taking a normal pharmaceutical medicine. It was developed in the United States, but it was produced in China. And we started finding out that in China, some of the people over there are actually cursing it. I suspect probably for the same reasons, that the Mexicans were doing it, either to boost the addictive effect or in order to just harm Americans. And so one of the things that I tell people is, and that's another reason why you should have this blessing. That's why I tell people, have your medicine blessed. And if you can't find a priest who's willing to do it, or if you can't get to a priest in time before you have to actually take a medicine, then I tell them, well, just say the prayer that we say before before we eat. Bless us, O Lord, in these gifts which you're about to receive. Say that same blessing as you're consuming it, because sometimes if it's a low level kind of a ritual, it'll clear that out. But yeah, you can have the same problem, and this is an indication that people have to be careful again of what their source is. So if you can find medicine that's not manufactured in China and made in the United States. Someone actually asked me if this is a problem in the United States, and I've been doing some investigation and have not found any clear indication that I would feel comfortable saying, yeah, it's happening in the United States too. But so it's one of those things, even though I think a lot of big pharma are into a lot of evil things these days, especially with the forms of experimentation and how they're actually even producing drugs now. Point being is that have all your medicines blessed is what I've been telling people.
I think it's a good policy to have all your stuff blessed when you can. And if you can't, say the general prayers you might say, make the sign of the cross over it, things of this sort, to at least, if it's a low-level type of thing, you'll cover that.
Although I should say, the church has said that making the sign of a cross over something, unless it's like parents doing it over their children, if it's over things, that's proper to a priest alone.
Oh, right.
But you can make a sign of a cross over yourself and ask God to bless the thing. Just
right.
Request and petition Him, and God will honor that most of the time. So that can clear out a lot of problems.
That's good to know. Actually, I don't think I've ever made the sign of the cross over anything, so that's good to know. Luckily. So now there's another area, kind of shifting gears slightly from this. There's another area where modesty. Okay, and when you hear modesty, usually it's, women shouldn't be wearing this. Women should be wearing this, and they should have this, and they should have it. And so a lot of women feel kind of borne down upon, because it's always about what women should be doing and how much they should be wearing and how going down to the ankle, or they should have this much covered. But there's never a discussion of what men should be doing. So I saw once some traditional group where all the women were very nice skirts, very nice things, and the boys were all in t-shirts and jeans, or tank tops and things like that. So what should be said in the way of men's modesty? Is there a way that men can be immodest? And what kind of deportment should men generally be carrying out in their dress? Like, what are the principles there, and how should that carry out, say, in American culture today?
Well, ironically, it's the same as it is for women, except that there's the application's obviously going to be a little bit different. One of the principal things that men have to worry about more than others is form. You don't want to reveal too much of your form, because for women, even of those of average virtue, seeing guys wearing certain things like obviously a Speedo swimsuit, a woman of average virtue has to avert her eyes, and because this is something that there's too much of the form is being revealed there, and so you just simply don't do that. It's also the same in relationship to, guys. I think there's a bit of immodesty in relationship to guys. If it's only guys that are around each other, and there's no possibility of women seeing it, and they have their shirts off because it's hot and they're working, etc. That's one thing. But I do think that generally speaking that. And this is part of the whole modesty thing, and you saw this actually in relationship to women in the past. It was recognized that it was a suffering to dress modestly, but this is just a burden you bore in order to protect the spiritual states of other people. Today especially, women say, well, I should just be able to get to wear whatever I want, and that doesn't mean that bad things should happen to me as a result of that. Well, it's a complete violation of the scholastic principle that the appetite is moved by the presence of its object. If you put this thing out there, then that's what's going to happen. The guys are going to be moved, and then they have to fight it. And then, then they give you the line of Cain. Well, I'm not responsible for that. Actually, you are. Because that's what, Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? Well, actually, God, we know from our Catholic faith, yes, you are. You have an obligation to do those things to protect the virtue of other people. And so with men, not wearing enough clothing, etc., can itself be a problem. Then there's also the problem of decorum. What you wear should fit who and what you are. And so this is something that's really slid in the United States, especially like in the professional fields and things like that, guys want to be able to go to work in a business setting and they want to go in jeans and flip-flops or whatever, instead of actually wearing a suit, which shows a sign of professionalism and a recognition that you set a certain impression or conceptualization of who and what you are to people. They develop an image of who and what you are based upon what you wear, and that's a real thing. We notice this too. I mean, that's why police officers wear certain things, firemen, etc., because when we see them, then we immediately recognize this is who this person is, etc. Well, in the past, they used to talk about how Christian men should dress a certain way that reflects the dignity of their being Christian men. And so dressing like a slob, or not combing your hair or things like that were considered, in addition to it being lazy, which is against the virtue of fortitude, but it was also considered against modesty, because there should be a certain presentableness in order to engender affability. That is, there should be a certain pleasantness, and you should be able to easily be able to have people approachable and have a certain, present a pleasant exterior to them, so that it's not just about your comfort, which is the problem in the United States especially. It's become about people's comfort rather than who's wearing it, rather than helping people to be inspired to other virtue, or to noble virtues, to magnanimity and things of that sort, but also just to inspire people to treat each other with dignity. Another thing that you're seeing a lot of men do is wearing things like jewelry. Well, look at Eve. When God created Eve, he created her, and then it says he brought her to Adam. Now, implicit in that is the fact that for Adam's judgment of suitability to him. That's why women have a better sense of how they appear, what they wear. That's why they can wear certain kinds of jewelry, and we consider that suitable to their state as women. And whereas men, we're not supposed to be dressing like women. This is something in which we're not supposed to be putting on things so that people will somehow view us through the lens of as being suitable and like a woman is. And part of this has to do with the fact that what should really attract a woman to a man is not his jewelry or what he's wearing, except insofar as it can tell something about his state of virtue or lack of virtue, but rather his virtue itself is the thing that is the decora for him. It's the thing that he vests himself with, so to speak, so that the woman will be attracted to, recognizing this is a man of virtue, this is a man who's going to sacrifice for me, etc. So men are wearing things, or the real beaut was in the past, and I think they're still doing it, is men wearing makeup and things of this sort. This is completely effeminate. It has no place. It's completely immodest, and it's also a lack of just manliness on a certain level. There's also guys getting tattoos and things like that, aside from the fact that tattoos are actually against the fifth commandment, which is a form of mutilation. At least that's how the old moral manuals used to discuss it. And now they're getting pierced. They got gauges in their ears and things of this sort. This is a sign that, there's a certain effeminacy in all of that, because a real man doesn't need those kinds of things for his own self-expression, for his manifestation of his virtue, or his of the fact that he's the type of man that a woman should want to marry, or what have you, or have interaction with other men. And so, seeing guys not being modest in that respect, and so they should be wearing stuff that covers their form sufficiently enough for the woman of average virtue, and they shouldn't be doing these other things that are against modesty. There's another aspect too, is if you're striving for virtue, there should be a certain manifestation of that. There should be kind of a nobleness in your dress and things like that. And I'm not talking about, go out and buying a $2,000 suit and that's where you wear absolutely everywhere. Because part of decorum is that you dress up for certain things because the occasion and the circumstances are elevated. So, for example, going to Mass, it's good to make sure you're wearing proper things for Mass. And so a lot of one of my spiritual directees, he might wear jeans or something like that in certain circumstances, but whenever he goes to Mass, he makes sure he has slacks and a nice shirt and things of that sort. So I think there's a certain kind of decorum in that. But also just in being around other people, making sure that your clothes aren't slovenly, that they're clean, and that they show a certain nobility of soul. They should be a reflection of us in some way. So there should be a certain nobility of soul in all of that. And I think that's, you're right. I think that there can be a bit of a burden, and sometimes women feel like they are being, criticized more than men. And I think that the men are starting to dress in ways. And a lot of that has to do with just the general effeminacy of the fact that guys now are dressing based on their comfort rather on what's more noble or more virtuous.
Right, and just to be clear, so we don't have to do another edition of What Did Father Ripperger Really Say? You're not saying a man working out in the field or on the farm has to wear a suit.
No, not at all. In fact, that's part of the decorum. What he's going to wear in the field should fit that kind of work, so he gets in he might put on overalls or coveralls or something like that to go work in the field or something like that. But then when he's interacting with other men or in certain circumstances, he would be wearing nicer clothing or clothing that fits the circumstances. It's really about the clothes fitting the circumstance. If we see some guy working in a field in a suit, there's a certain admiratio in that. It's where you're like, what is he doing? We recognize those are expensive items of clothing. They're easily going to get dirty or torn, and so you don't wear them there because it's unsuitable. And so this is one of the things that it's a matter of making sure that what you wear fits the circumstances.
You also talked about jewelry there, and wearing excessive jewelry. You see it in certain types of like musical videos where people wear kinds of big golden chains, the rather ostentatious type of chains and things like that around their neck. But what about men do tend to wear jewelry, wedding rings, for example, or you
Right.
have a reasonably pious Catholic man, he's got a miraculous medal, maybe,
Right.
a St. Benedict crucifix. I mean, obviously it's a religious object, but couldn't it also be considered jewelry in some sense?
Well, I suppose you could in a certain sense, although jewelry usually has the connotation of being something which is done to make the appearance of the individual, enhance the appearance of the individual in some fashion. And things like the miraculous medal and the like, that's not really there to designed to enhance the appearance of the individual, but to manifest some pursuit of virtue, such as devotion or religion or something like that. Wedding rings are a different kind of a situation because wedding rings, the wearing of rings by men is always considered the manifestation of some excellence. So marriage being an excellence, this is the manifestation of that. The wedding ring is also the way in which people can recognize that this individual is under vows and therefore he's not available, etc. Bishop wears a ring, which is a manifestation of the excellence of his office, things of this sort. So it has a different kind of, obviously the bishop, if he's wearing a piece of jewelry to enhance the way he looks, we've already got a problem. But this is, he's not wearing it for that reason, or he shouldn't be wearing it for that reason. It should be to manifest the excellence of his office.
So kind of like Cardinal Jimenez, it was the primate in Spain in the late 15th century, and he was a Franciscan before being elevated to being a bishop, and then he was made a cardinal. And to emphasize his humility, he wanted to wear his Franciscan habit, and
Right.
just simply with a mitre over. He did not want to wear episcopal garments. He thought they was too rich, and he had to be ordered by the Pope to put on the dress of a bishop, and not him put away his Franciscan habit, just because this is what the people expect, but it's also a sign of your office
Right.
as a bishop. So whereas he was trying to keep on the Franciscan habit, so denying the offices and the signs of the office and embracing what seems to them to be humility is actually in itself kind of a sign of immodesty in that case.
Yes, it actually is. It's a lack of humility, ironically. You'll see the same thing with bishops. You go to venerate their ring, and they'll say, no, don't do that. Well, that's just absurd. First of all, it's not about them. It's about the office. The second thing is that their obligation, when you assume an office, you have an obligation to conform yourself as a matter of detachment and humility, conform yourself to the dignity of that office for the sake of other people. It's not about you, it's about the office. And so this is one of the reasons why in a situation like that, he needs to dress in a manner that manifests the excellence of his office. It's the same thing with venerating the rings of bishops and popes and things of this sort. It's because it's a manifestation that the ring is, you're venerating that. You're not venerating the ring so much as you are venerating what it's a sign of, which is their office, because we should have a filial and pious devotion to them. So they're not just what they wear, but even their behavior now has to conform on a different level from being a priest to a bishop because of the excellence of their office, and that too is part of modesty.
Well, Father Ripper, thank you for joining us. Shorter interview than we tend to do, but I think unless there's something else you wanted to address on things that you might be said to be saying and not really be saying.
No, I suppose that's always going to be a problem. People are always going to say I said this or that. I'm also coming across the phenomenon where people are putting out their own ideas and saying I was the one who said it in order to give it some grounding, which is absurd. But the point being is that when you see a meme or something like that, don't always believe that I actually said it.
Right. And on the line too of what you actually say, some people seem to, that, oh, well, Father Ripperger said it. That's the gold standard. That means it's absolutely true. We can trust it, and he's absolutely going to be right all the time. And I've known you for a number of years. I know that's not the view that you have. Should people be taking what you say absolutely?
Well, from the very beginning of my priesthood, and even from whenever I would write or do podcasts or interviews like this, my goal was always to get people to not pay attention to me, but to the tradition. Bring in the tradition, refer them to the saints, have them look at the saints, have them look at the moral manuals and the stuff from the past. And I'm ultimately not an authority ultimately in this stuff, because I'm not a member of the magisterium, for one thing, but second of all, I haven't been canonized, and I hope that I reach sanctity enough to be able to do that, but I'm not guaranteeing that either. But I think it's one of those things that people can't take my word as infallible, obviously, because I'm a human being and I can commit error, and the Holy Spirit isn't guiding me like he is the Pope under certain circumstances. Obviously not all the time, but under certain circumstances. And I think that one of the things that I would like to see a little bit more of, but I don't know, I think we're, in the current day and age, we're just not there, is, during the medieval period, they would never quote someone who was alive. And there's two reasons for that. One is because you don't want to blow the guy up and make him think he's more important than he actually is. The second component is you don't know if later down the road he's not going to go off the rails. So you don't quote him, because then you might get stuck with this situation where, now the guy's gone off the rails. What do we do? Because we've got all this stuff in publication by him, etc. And so the main thing to do is to just, that's why I keep telling people, go back to the saints, go back to what the church has said, etc. Look at the tradition. And that's where they should be seeking their certitude in what is said, not in